was Indiana, um, um, Notre Dame, and you know, nobody had to leave the state, right? And I think it was pretty exciting being on campus. This was obviously Friday night, touchdown Jesus in full effect. And, you know, I kind of expected it to be maybe a little bit closer than it was because it basically was total Notre Dame domination.
Yeah, the thing that we said this before when we previewed it, that we just didn't know enough about these teams
Yeah.
because neither one of them played like insanely hard schedules. That said, like Notre Dame had at least played and beaten like some talented teams,
Yeah.
right? Like Florida State, not a good team at all, but a ton of talent, and they beat them soundly. USC, not a great team, but they beat them soundly. Texas A&M, just an okay team, finished, like
I mean, a lot of
above
talent
average.
on that team.
Yeah. So, but beat them, right?
Yeah.
Like, so they did what they needed to do. And then they
Sure.
had one really bad loss, and that seemed to kind of refocus them. Indiana legitimately never beat a good team. And
Yeah.
that's something we'll talk about in a little bit. So
Yeah.
it was now they played in that Ohio State game.
Sure.
They didn't get blown out the way that Ohio State blew Tennessee out or anything, but like they weren't really competitive in that game. And so you were like, well, we'll see. Like, we don't know what to. Notre Dame's defense was every bit as good as I thought. And that, to me, when we previewed this, we said they will run and they will play defense. And I
Yeah.
actually liked Indiana's quarterback better. He didn't play better against a great defense, but their defense was very, very good. And you do wonder, like, how good is Indiana's offense really? Like, they put up a lot of points this year. And I know they weren't against great teams, but like, that's my biggest takeaway is that Notre Dame's defense was there were a lot of good things that the winning teams did. Their defense was one of the best things we saw this weekend.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think for all the jokes we make about Notre Dame and what happens when they make the postseason, they looked really good, particularly on defense. Then we move into Saturday. We've got SMU and Penn State. College Station. Obviously, this game happened during the day, right? So not necessarily the home field advantage that you get when it's a whiteout at night in Happy Valley, but still a pretty good home field advantage, particularly given the weather. I mean, obviously a little bit colder than it is over there in Dallas, but the story of the game has to be turnovers, right?
Yeah, I thought this sounds so dumb, but the game, like, they only outgained SMU by like 80 yards. Like, the game from a down to down perspective was relatively close. And I know you can't do this, right? Like, you can't do what I'm about to say.
Yeah.
But if you take the 2 pick sixes away, like, say those are just sacks or get thrown away or whatever.
Right.
And then take the fact that SMU got stopped inside the 10 twice away. I mean, that's potentially 28 points. Like, and I'm not, obviously you can't do that. Penn State was the better team. They deserved to win. They blew them out. But that's why to me, the game was much closer than the final score from a down to, like, SMU moved the ball into the red zone 3 times and came away with 3 points. And so, yeah, Penn State wasn't, to me, they were impressive, but their defense was. Their offense wasn't overly impressive. SMU just kept giving them the ball. And I mean, there was a point where you're looking up and it's 14-0 and you're almost to halftime and you're just thinking, like, this game should be 0-0 right now. Like, an actual good defensive game. I thought SMU's defense played really well. Their offense just was absolutely tragic. And yeah, turnovers 100% were the difference.
Yeah. After Penn State kind of, rolls, we move on to the midday game, 4:00 kickoff, Clemson, Texas. Here's another one where, I love these playoff games on campus. I guess it's maybe easy to say that home field advantage, played a role, but the teams that were favored all won. So maybe it didn't. I don't know. But I felt like the atmosphere seemed really cool. You and I talked about this a little bit today on the phone, not on air. And, I've been to a lot of really big college football games, multiple national championships, multiple SEC championships. And I will argue to the death that the atmosphere at a good regular season rivalry game is 10 times better than the atmosphere at a national championship game. And every national championship game I've gone to, my team has won. So it's not like that's why the atmosphere wasn't good to me. But I just think these games on campus is such a smart move. Kind of bummed that all the teams that earned a bye don't get to have it on their campuses. That feels like something maybe that needs to be reworked. But Clemson, Texas, this was one that we really thought was going to be incredibly one-sided. And I do, obviously Texas was never really at risk here, but Clemson continued to fight back.
Yeah, I thought it's tough to know. I mean, obviously Texas is winning by a million, and then
Right.
Clemson fights back. And even had Clemson, so they cut it to one score, and then the next play they run off that 74-yard touchdown, and it's pretty much over there. And then they get stopped on the one again, which even if they had scored there to cut it to 7, Texas wasn't going to be stopped. And even if they did stop Texas once and go tie it up,
Yeah.
I feel like Texas was either going to win in overtime unless something fluky happened, or they were just going to go down and kick a game-winning field goal with their really good kicker. And so, yeah, Clemson made it competitive. It was the only game that was actually fun to watch, or the only second half that was fun to watch of the weekend. And so shout out to Clemson for giving us some entertainment. But I just thought Texas was too good. I thought Texas, it's tough to know, and we'll talk about Texas more later, so maybe I'll just save this. But it's tough to know, why did they let them back in it? Did Clemson just kind of find something? Did Texas let their foot off the gas? I don't know.
Yeah.
But at least it was somewhat entertaining because it was the only half of football that was that.
Yeah, where there was just anything even remotely up in the air. The night game, Ohio State, Tennessee. And this is one that this is probably the game that I was the most surprised at the outcome. Not necessarily so surprised that Ohio State won, but kind of in the fashion that they did, right? I mean, first of all, leading up into this game, if you watched game day, if you watched any of the pregame from this, it was just Tennessee fans everywhere. I have some Tennessee fans in my family. They made the 5.5 hour drive from Knoxville to watch this game. They kept sending us pictures and videos of just, Neyland North. There was Tennessee fans everywhere. Then you watch the team come out shirtless for warm up, showing that the cold doesn't affect them in any way. Like, I really did feel like Tennessee came to play, and then they kicked off, and it just was kind of all downhill from there. I mean, there was really not a single solitary minute where it felt like Tennessee was in this ball game.
Yeah, it fell over from not the start, but they scored 21 points in the first quarter, and you're on the road and you're not playing well. They made it 21-10 at the half, and they did get the ball first. So you're thinking okay, well, if they go score,
right at
maybe.
the end of the second, they started to show signs of life.
But they didn't, and Ohio State scored on the next 3, and it was over, right? It was, so yeah, that's the one that surprised me the most. I think everybody kind of had in their mind the way that Ohio State played against Michigan.
Yeah.
And kind of thought that would maybe
this isn't the Ohio State team
Yeah.
that I've watched this year.
Yeah, this was impressive. Well, I mean, they looked good against Oregon, and that went down to a last second play.
Yeah.
And so they certainly at times but yeah, they've got so much talent that with this much time, they were good to go. Obviously, Tennessee losing Sampson early, certainly didn't help, but I don't even know if that would have mattered. That, Sampson couldn't have covered all those wide receivers that Ohio State has. So, yeah, that's the result that surprised me the most. I took Ohio State to cover, I think. I can't remember, but I definitely took them to win. But I thought, after the first 3 games, I think we all said, well, we knew those games could get out of hand. At least this one will be good. And it was the worst game of all of them. It was so terrible.
Well, and I've seen all of these people say hey, all you SEC homers, keep the same energy for Tennessee. Listen, absolutely same energy for Tennessee. None of these 4 teams that lost belonged, right? And I think that is kind of the overall arcing thing that we can walk away from this weekend with at this moment is that I don't think 12 was necessary, right?
No.
There isn't, and we've said, you and I have talked about this for years, right? And one of the things that I feel like we have always said is that 12 teams is not going to get us different national champions at the end of each season, right? It's just going to create more games to getting what is probably the exact same national champion each time. So There's more revenue, so schools are excited about that. There's more football games, and I'm absolutely not opposed to more football, but I don't think this is going to change the ultimate outcome in any way. And I don't think you can argue that any of the four teams that lost really had a legitimate shot at winning a title.
Yeah, and then that's where I'm at with the rest of them too. Like, could some of the teams that got left out or that were just
Mhm.
behind, like you look at the next four teams: Alabama, Miami, South Carolina, Ole Miss, right?
Mhm.
Could any of those four teams given us more competitive or more fun or more entertaining games, depending on who they were matched up against? Absolutely. I mean, I don't think anybody matched up against Ohio State would have done super well the way they were
Yeah.
playing last night. But compared to some of the other teams, sure, But like, if you'd have gotten South Carolina, Notre Dame, like, are you really confident that like if Miami would have had to go up to Penn State, like, are you really like, maybe they would have made
So
it
I
more
think
competitive than
we would have
SMU?
gotten some more competitive games. And I think we kind of have two issues going on simultaneously. One, it's hard to argue that teams 8 through 12 have, or 9 through 12 or whatever, really have a legitimate chance at a national
To
title.
win.
But
And then 13 through 16, whatever that next four would be, they might create more entertaining games.
I do think we could have gotten some more competitive games. Again, I doubt it changes the final outcome at all. And has been my argument all along for not expanding the playoffs. But I do think we could have gotten some more competitive games. And I think part of that also is seeding, right? Which is something you and I have also talked a lot about. The way that the seeding is set up is absurd. Think about if Ohio State does win, the path that they would have had to take to get to there versus some of these other teams. It's kind of crazy. So the loser of the SEC, Texas, gets to play Arizona State, right? But Georgia has to play Notre Dame. That doesn't make this make sense to me here.
Yeah, same thing in the other conference. Oregon has to play Ohio State,
Mm-hmm.
whereas Penn State gets to play Boise State, right? The
Right.
two losers of their conference championships
Get easier
get
path.
easier paths. And
Right.
at the end of the day, you're gonna have to beat everybody. So I get it. But like,
And
it's a lot easier to not play. Imagine having to play, if you're Georgia, having to play Notre Dame, who might be playing some of the best football in college football in the last 2 months, having to play Notre Dame first, and then Penn State, and then Texas, Ohio State, or Oregon. Now watch
yeah.
Arizona State like upset everybody and
And this
make
is
it
after
live.
you already had to play Texas for a second time
Yep.
to get your seat to begin with. And
Yeah.
but the
For as
problem
much as And
is
as
the
much
bye.
as we hate the NFL, they do such a good job of reseeding. Like,
Yeah.
they will never screw that team, but like they don't let the seeds,
Yeah.
like, they move them around to where the one seed, like, if the 5 and 6 seeds win, they change the bracket around to where you play
Yeah.
the highest remaining seed. I
Yeah.
think I'd like the seeding to change altogether,
Oh,
but I
same.
would like to see that change. If you're going to keep it this way, say, okay, if a 12 seed wins, we're giving Oregon that game, right?
Yeah.
We're giving, or like, this isn't the NBA with parity and everything else that goes on and a 7-game series to where the better team's going to win most of the time.
Right.
We're going to change it around to where if a 12 seed beats a 5, we are not rewarding the 4 seed to get to play. Could you imagine if Arizona State, which Clemson would still be a favorite, but if Arizona State would get to play Clemson right now with all their issues, as opposed to, like, that would be so unfair. And so, yeah, you if you're gonna with now, if the conferences were equal, which we know they're not, if the
Right.
schedules were equal, which we know they're not, then you could say, yeah, if a 12 wins, then the 4 just gets a little lucky, right?
Yeah.
That year. But in a situation where you have Clemson as a 12 seed, Clemson was the team that least deserved to be in, and
Sure.
they were the most competitive against the best team.
Yeah.
Like, because of their talent. It's not anything that Clemson did. It's not Texas's problem. It's the fact that their talent is absurd. And
Yeah.
so, well, or really, really good. I don't want to call it, but like, so yeah, you've got to change. The seating is so bad.
Well, we really just from the jump, right, need to do 1 through 12. This giving buys to conference champions. If there isn't parity in conferences, so the runner-up of the SEC or the runner-up of the Big 10 is a better team than the conference champion of the Big 12, right? And we're skipping over teams because some of these, like, think about SMU and Clemson and stuff, and we're moving these teams up. None of it, I don't know. None of it makes sense to me. Just seed them 1 through 12, top 4 get a bye, regardless of the conference, regardless if they won their conference, and just, continue to go from there.
I'm good with 0 auto bids because
Yeah.
let's say Texas A&M would have found their way. Like, did we really think that they deserved to get in just because they won the SEC on tiebreakers and they had lost to Notre Dame and stuff? Like, I mean, and I'll tell you right now, I think as much as we both hate them, I would take Miami on a neutral field against SMU right now. And I would take Miami probably on a neutral field against Clemson right now too, with how bad their defense is. And so, I mean, I think Miami's better than both those teams that were in it. And so if we're going to play this game of, oh, does Alabama deserve to be in over this team or does South Carolina be? I mean, I think Miami should be in over both of. Now, I'm glad they weren't, right? Like, because I don't like them. But I think Miami's better than both those teams. As somebody who objectively hates Miami, if we're going to play this game, and so that's why auto bids are stupid to me. There's no way in heck that Clemson should be in over a Miami team.
And we really do have to decide, are we looking for the 12 most deserving teams or are we looking for the 12 best teams? Because those are not always the same set of 12 teams. And, for the sake of the sport, I think you need to look at the 12 best teams.
So let's think about that. So my question about that would be, the word best is so subjective though. Like that's not to me, that sounds good, but like, I don't even know what that means. Like, are you talking about best wins, best losses, best resume, best at the time, best over the course of a season?
I think the first thing you look at is best wins. Honestly, I think you look at how many wins do you have in the top 25, how many, and look, I understand that we can't change what our schedules are. They are what they are, but Indiana, we're touting them being 11-1 and they've beaten the teams that they need to beat. They've done well against their schedule. Right. But there are teams in other conferences that are, 9 wins that would beat them. That would beat them 9 out of 10 times if they played. And that's what I'm talking about in terms of deserving versus best. I don't think it should just be, we've checked this box because our record is the best, we belong in. You haven't been challenged.
What's tough about that, and I don't fully disagree, but I do think what's tough about that is what I think I asked you this last week too when we were talking about Alabama getting left out. If Alabama had lost to Auburn, right, and they finished 8-4, we would still probably say that they beat SMU in a hypothetical game, right? We would say that they probably still beat.
SMU really doesn't belong in there.
Right. But at that point, does Bama really belong at 8-4? Because Bama would still be.
Those are our 2 imperfect choices left, and one of them we think would beat the other one 9 times out of 10 on a neutral field. Then I don't care if that team's 8-4. That's the team that belongs in there.
So what if they'd have lost to Georgia too, and they were 7-5, and you said that they still would win on a neutral field?
To me, that's not hypothetical that could happen. If they're 7-5, they'd be sitting where Florida was sitting, which was unranked.
But so that's the logic. But the logic you're using is still the best 12 teams, the 12 teams that so there's got to be a line somewhere. And I'm good with using the best
BCS
teams.
System. That's what the fix to all of this is. That weights all of these things.
And I'm completely good with that. But just this subjective idea of best, to me, doesn't. I still think wins and losses have to matter. And do I think Bama would beat Indiana on a head-to-head? Absolutely. I absolutely do. But I also thought Bama would beat Vandy on a head-to-head. I also thought Bama would beat Oklahoma on a head-to-head.
You can't just look straight wins and losses. There's
not straight wins and losses. I agree with that. You can't go straight wins and losses.
But the BCS would solve this for us. A computer system that calculates all of it, that takes everything into account and removes the human element from the equation is the way to go. Because this is the problem. There's 12 people sitting around having the exact same conversations that you and I are having, and they have different views on what is best, who is the most deserving, what does the most best mean. And that's how or what does the word best mean? That's why we're in this situation, right?
Right. That's why we get into trouble, is because we don't even know what, like you just said, we don't know what best means.
Yeah.
Because I don't believe that we should get to a point where we say, give me the 12 teams that Vegas would favor on the field and just give me that only. Because if that's the case, why even play the games? Right? Like Ohio State lost to Oregon and is the favorite when they play each other next week. So Vegas would tell you that Ohio State's a better team than Oregon right now. And so I think there's got to be some mix of the two, some mix of who would win in this matchup, but there also has to be a line. If
Yeah.
Bama would have lost another game, we would still favor them. And so you can't just go by the
We would,
Vegas
but we're
odds.
looking at where they're putting the top, let's call it 16-ish teams, and then kind of deciding who within that top 16 would beat who. So if Bama had lost another one, they wouldn't be in those teams that we discussed. And so I think that's where you're calculating your schedule versus how you would perform against the other teams on the field. You're looking at a certain subset, and for this it was probably 16, and deciding kind of who to leave out. And then looking at that, I would have left out SMU over leaving out Bama. It's not I would have picked Bama out of 120 teams that I was looking at. It's if these are my 16 choices, this is how I'm kind of deciding the last couple spots.
I also think the argument for Bama specifically, and so people shifted their thinking real quick to Tennessee, or I'm sorry, to South Carolina. The argument for Bama took a pretty big hit with Tennessee going down. Like Tennessee losing by $1 billion.
I honestly was kind of shocked about Tennessee's
Yeah,
performance. I mean,
I didn't
I've
expect
seen
that.
Tennessee play better games. This also is the best game that I've seen Ohio State play. And, kudos to them for this is not the same team that lost to Michigan, but I've seen Tennessee play a lot better games. Honestly, Heupel should be mortified that they looked that unprepared with the time that they had to do it and on this massive stage.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that it's, but again, the I don't know. Again, we're arguing something that we really shouldn't be because one, you're right about computers just deciding it for us instead of this subjective measure. Because then if computers, you could have, remember in the BCS, teams would run up the score, for more, you knew like how to, not how to game this, not how to game the system, but essentially how to game the system, how to make it better, right? Like how to make your resume better, how to do this, how to do that. To whereas now we don't know, we're asking to be solving an equation that we don't know the formula to, right? Like what are we supposed to do?
Any coach that leaves points on the field, dock him. Okay. Run up the score every chance you get, whatever game you're playing in. I'm here for that.
So, all right, if you're watching this either right now or on replay, make sure that you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any of our stuff. We'll always be live on Sunday nights. We may do something right after the next round of playoff games too. And then, of course, we'll clip this up so that people can see other things.